I am now delighted to welcome Michael Su to the forum, the acting comptroller of the currency. Thanks so very much for joining us, and congratulations on your new role.
Thank you, Chris.
Okay, so we've heard from Dr. Rouse about racial income and wealth gaps. Obviously, these were playing out in the labor markets, and we talked about the larger spillover effects that these issues are having for people seeking employment. But how do you see these developments from your standpoint at the OCC and in this conversation as a banking regulator?
Thanks, Chris. So banks play a huge role in recoveries. We know that historically that kind of the speed and the strength and robustness of recoveries is often correlated with the strength of the banking system and access to banking services. And the OCC is the primary regulator for about 70% of the nation's commercial banking activities. And our mission, ensure safe and sound banks, and ensure that there's fair access to financial services and that customers are treated fairly. So those second two really, I think, feed into this to this issue. And I think Dr. Rouse did a great job of just highlighting the fact that we are at risk of a K recovery, where the wedge between the haves and the have-nots gets bigger, and I think that kind of the banking system has a role in that, and that's kind of how I'm coming at it and how the agency's approaching these issues. Well,
banking is important. It's critical to recoveries. We do have a different kind of technology-driven economy, but it's obviously something that finance has seen for a while. Now, technology can be an enabling force, as Dr. Rouse said. It can be a disruptive force, or it can entrench interests. These are all issues that the OCC is very familiar with. Now, you have a Project Reach program that's at least in part designed to tackle participation in the banking system. Maybe you can just provide a very quick sort of primer on the program and really whether or not it's been a success against the backdrop of the pandemic.
Right. So Project Reach, I'd like to really highlight something that's what I think is unique about Project Reach. The tools that bank regulators have, examinations, enforcement actions, rule writing. So we're going to use all of those in service of fair access and fair treating customers fairly, anti-discrimination, et cetera. The other power we have is convening. And so Project Reach is really built on the convening power. And my predecessor and others before me started this. So they really deserve credit for getting this started. But really convening diverse set of stakeholders, MDIs, large banks, civil rights groups, community groups, technology companies, try to solve some problems. And so here, I'd like to really focus on two problems that I think are really critical. One is revitalizing MDIs. I think there's recognition that MDIs need to be revitalized. We're in this window now where there's a lot of energy around that, which is great. And the other is credit invisibles. So these are people who don't have credits. 45 million Americans don't have credit scores. It's very hard to participate in the recovery if you don't have a credit score. And yet they pay their bills. They cash flow. They are credit worthy, but they're not part of the system. Technology can help. And so through this Project Reach, there's a work stream on credit invisibles, alternative credit scoring. That's very technology based. It's a lot based on technology and data and how to use that. And we have a number of pilots that have been essentially incubated by Project Reach. They're very exciting. I think there's a lot of details that have to get worked out, which we want to do en route to scaling that. Because I think that, again, brings folks into the mainstream financial system, which is part of the recovery story.
So you've brought in sort of two different issues. We have, on the one hand, there's the question, that we're going to be focusing on a lot for the rest of the conference, which is, the particular place of MDIs, either minority owned or minority focused or minority centered right. Financial institutions that are often very small, and what does sort of technology mean for them, as well as what does technology mean for the ultimate end user, right? Right. Which is really, I guess, that second part of what you are identifying. When you're thinking about different areas to explore post-pandemic, right? Like when you think again about these very specific kinds of institutions and the mission that they have, and again, they're the end users. What kinds of areas are you thinking about exploring? Are there any particular technologies that you think may be more consequential for those kinds of banks or their customers? And really the banks, when it comes to their ability to succeed in the upcoming years.
So I'll make a couple of different points. I loop back to the point that you made at the outset. Technology holds great promise. And I think that is part of the theme. I think that's what's really exciting about this event, is that really trying to highlight that and promoting that. I think there's great promise. And I'll give a couple examples there. It's also a challenge. And the challenge is that a lot of technology the business models are predicated on scale. And that works in some instances. I think in the MDI context, not necessarily. And I think we have to be cognizant of where it's kind of working for us and kind of against us, if you will. In terms of the promise, I was recently talking to the head of a bank that was focused on Native Americans. And he noted that one of their issues is geographic dispersion. Like clients are really, really spread out. And so technology going mobile, absolutely critical, right? You can't open branches all over the place. You got to really lean in to the opportunities afforded by mobile technology. That's different than, say, in the Asian American bank, where you've got a lot of the customers are going back to Asia and are living in two different financial worlds, one that's highly connected and one that's less connected, versus, say, some Black-owned banks that have other issues that are dealing with infrastructure where they are. So there's it's hard to kind of bucket these into one size fits all. And I really encourage kind of getting into the details here, because that's what really matters. The one shared challenge really has to do with the cores. And so a lot of this is not just MDIs, but community banks in general rely heavily on a small number of firms to provide a lot of back office and technology services. And their ability to move forward depends a lot on them. And so that needs attention. So we've done that in Project Reach, trying to get the cores and the MDIs working together to improve that experience, to improve what that can be provided. And things like that we need a lot of attention to that to make sure to move that ball forward.
Yeah, that's extraordinarily helpful. It does also really complicate things, as you mentioned. I mean, I'm sure in subsequent panels, people will be bringing up all kinds of things. You brought up alternative data, maybe credit scoring for those end users. When you think about the technology that different institutions are using, whether or not it be open banking or blockchain or reg tech, for AML purposes. I mean, there's a host of new technologies and a host of different situations for them. And that, I think, requires very much of an intergovernmental strategy. You're a mighty important person, but other parts of the government have to chip in. How and where do you see that coordination as being most necessary and useful, given the diversity of situations in which the customers and clients of these MDIs live their lives?
Yeah. So the folks around here are getting sick of me saying this phrase, faster alone, farther together. And I think that kind of speaks to what you're talking about, is that especially the federal banking agencies, when we partner together and agree upon an approach, generally that tends to be more durable over time, provides more certainty so that the industry and others can kind of move along. A great example of this is with the Community Reinvestment Act. This is something that we're reviewing right now. And that's a very important dimension to what you're talking about, Chris, is that, well, hey, the OCC did something on its own first. Props to moving, changing the discussion, taking action, but kind of going together really does, I think, lead to kind of more durable outcomes and impact a broader group. I do think that, one thing with technology, it helps to have standards. It helps to have shared lexicon concepts so that we can focus on the right things. Like, how How do you deliver the best service to a particular customer? MDIs are great at that. That is their comparative. You don't want them spending their time on kind of collective action problems. That's what we're for. It's kind of being able to suss that out and put some action behind that, I think would be really helpful. We're doing it in various spaces, but here we need to apply it here as well.
Well, props to you also for using the word props as the acting comptroller. But, I do think that one of those issues will be sort of that coordination issue and really maintaining your outreach and conversation with those affected communities. I want to sort of thank you for showing up so early as you've just come to the scene and to say thank you. This is extremely important. And we're going to be looking forward to seeing how your efforts unfold, and hopefully we'll continue this conversation going forward. With that, I'll send the program to my colleague, David Clooney, the Executive Director of the Black Economic Alliance.